At this point, my practice is limited to collaborative divorce, collaborative law, and I have most of my cases now in an interdisciplinary team model. Since the late 1990s, I've been able to limit my practice just to collaborative work and to training. And so I do about 1/3 of my time working with clients and the remainder of my time training, speaking, writing. Like many family lawyers, after I had been doing family law for a number of years, I started family law practice in the 80s, and I was good at it. Became a certified specialist in family law and a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. And what I was seeing, whether I won, whether I lost, client misery indistinguishable, and the excitement that I would get from the litigation process, which was not insignificant. I began my legal career as a public interest lawyer, and I did test case and class action work, and it's a lot of fun. But not when blood's pouring under the courthouse door, which is what happens at family court. One California judge of considerable eminence has said that that's where they shoot the survivors, and that's what it was like. My own theory is that if you practice family law all your life, that at some point your strategy is to become quite armored and perhaps depressed or alcoholic, or you find another way to do it. And I was hunting for that other way to do it for easily a decade, throughout the late 80s and 90s, and I got trained as a mediator. Mediation is very good in many circumstances, but it certainly wasn't the panacea that family lawyers had initially hoped it would be. And in terms of my own temperament, it wasn't a great fit, because I really flourish in an alliance with an individual. And while I can certainly do good mediation work, it's not where I find my joy. So I was looking, and I studied with a transpersonal cultural anthropologist, and I did a lot of reading, and I did a lot of experimenting, and I was like ripe ground waiting for the approach that would integrate everything that I knew about legal practice and everything that I think I was beginning to understand about the psychodynamics of the divorce process itself and the sociology of it. And that thing which pulled it all together for me was hearing about collaborative law. In the early 90s, I read an article, just a little newsletter piece about Stu Webb having appeared at a conference, and I read the 2 or 3 paragraphs describing what collaborative law was, and I said, oh, well, that's how I'm going to spend the rest of my career. And it was simply apparent to me that that was the thing that would pull together everything that I had been groping toward about finding an integrity-based way of helping people to get through this life transition and to understand it in a fuller sense than legal practice seemed to be able to bring to the table. So I contacted Stu immediately and said something to the effect of, would you mind telling me everything? And Stu being Stu, he said, sure. And so he sent me a nice big bundle of materials, and I contacted some lawyers in the South Bay who were also trying to get started in collaborative practice, and they were very generous with what they had put together. And I called a bunch of the lawyers. Actually, I started out with 2 other people who I knew had been grumbling for at least a decade also about not being able to work this way any longer. And I said, here's something that we could do. How about if we start a practice group? And we sat down and developed a list, I think it was 18 or 20 names of lawyers that each one of the 3 of us felt we could be very comfortable trying to develop a different mode of practice with. These were people that we thought were excellent lawyers and who were settlement oriented and who had very good reputations, because our initial sense was that we wanted to capture the interest and enthusiasm of that part of the family law bar that people looked to when they wanted to know whether something was reputable or not. So that's what we did. And lawyers being lawyers, we spent the next 18 months, all 18 or 20 of us, debating about how we were going to do this and what precise language we would have in our documentation. And finally, in somewhere around 1993 or 1994, I actually had my first client. And I often talk about this case in trainings because I learned so many lessons from it. And the first and most important lesson was that if I had known anything about collaborative practice, I would have realized that it was absurd to think that this was a collaborative case. But nonetheless, Larry Wilson and I represented this couple and managed to help them toward a much better resolution than they would have otherwise. They were about to have a fierce custody battle in court when they decided to change gears and turn to collaborative practice. And I actually got involved in that case because the husband in that case was coming to me for a second opinion about litigation strategy. And while I was mulling about his file that was about that big, his wife had an epiphany and contacted him and said, surely there's another way we can do this. So he came to me with her letter, which she had sent from Europe while on a trip with her lover. She was a wonderful woman in her way. And she said, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, it's all my fault. I can't understand how I could have done the things that brought us to this juncture. Isn't there some way we can step back? And my client brought this letter to me and said, what do I do? And I said, well, there is this new thing called collaborative law. And he was willing and she was willing. And so we did that. And even though it was very rough material for any collaborative lawyers to take on, and particularly the first case that we'd ever done, learned a lot from it and started talking about it and writing about it right from there, and never stopped, really. Sometimes people want to know what's challenging about collaborative practice, people who haven't had any first-hand or second-hand experience of it. And the truth is that from the lawyer's perspective, once you learn the craft and once you develop a cadre of colleagues that are operating on the same page that you are, that you trust, it would be hard to describe the work. I mean, it's challenging work, but there aren't challenges in the same way that there are in court, where you're running up against steep odds and sometimes insurmountable difficulties. In a well-managed collaborative case, again, when I train, I like to say that what we're doing is the Fred and Ginger dance, and we're exchanging roles as to who's Fred and who's Ginger, kind of seamlessly if we're doing it well. And when we build in an interdisciplinary team of mental health and financial professionals at the table as well, then we're doing more like Busby Berkeley choreography, if anybody of my generation is watching this and knowing who Busby Berkeley is. But a very complex bit of choreography to manage the conflict and guide the negotiations in a seamless way, so that from the client's perspective, they've got a congruent, cohesive container around what is inherently a very challenging and stressful process. So from the client's perspective, there are certainly plenty of life challenges that are presented during divorce, but I think in terms of the client's relationship to collaborative practice, the principal challenges come at the beginning in terms of making a fully informed choice of this rather than that, and investing 100% of energy and intentionality in doing it this way rather than another way. It's not that this is the only way to get through a divorce with integrity and without collateral damage to the children, but I've tried every way that I know of, and what I can truthfully say to my clients is, for most people, most of the time, this approach offers the most supportive and most integrated services to help people get from where they are and where they're going to be, which is sometimes rough, to a kind of a resolution that's durable, that's going to look good 10 or 15 years downstream, and that's going to work for all the members of the family.